Welcome to Conversations with Catholics. This is like episode 20 or something like that. And I'm joined today by Parker Zurbuch from Catholicism in the Car, the podcast where Parker will kind of pick a different topic and do, 10 to 30 minute videos where he explores pretty much anything that has to do with Catholicism. One such video that he made was about nominalism. And I think even before that video came out, there was a Facebook post. Parker asked the question, he said, has nominalism infected your thought or something like that? And Catholic YouTuber Kyle Whittington tagged me in that post. That was my first introduction to Parker, was nominalism. Then what I did is I actually wound up quoting that Facebook post in a video. I'm going to quickly share that video with the audience just by switching over to the full screen like this. This question was a Facebook post from Parker Zurbuch from the Catholic podcast Catholicism in the Car. The word choice. We started talking in each other's comment sections, a little bit over email, and a little bit even over Facebook. And we were just talking about, mostly, for the most part, nominalism. So with that, Parker, welcome to the show. And I guess you feel free to kind of tell us what Catholicism in the Car is all about. And then we can dive into nominalism or whatever else we want to talk about.
Yeah. I want to thank you, Kevin, for having me on, because I mean, like you said, we've had a fair amount of conversations leading up to this, and there's nothing like a personable conversation, preferably face to face, but in the day and age we live, this is the second best. So there's nothing really that compares to this, at least from what we've done so far. But yeah, Catholicism in the Car, it's a podcast that I run, and a YouTube channel. So it started off, I pretty much just record the episodes in my car on my commute to work, or from work. And, I'm a father. I work full time, as a land surveyor, for the Indiana Department of Transportation. And so I don't have a ton of time just to sit down and record and do things like this, but I do have a lot of time on a commute. So I figured that's a great way to start a podcast and kind of be able to have for me, it's kind of a creative outlet, to be able to share my thoughts, but then also, a way for me to document things that I've done, and also, just share them with others. So
That's awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I used to have a commute, but I'm a project manager. And so after the pandemic,
okay.
I've just been working remotely. And that's kind of what allowed me to do YouTube, I guess, because I was an audiobook guy. So when I was commuting,
Yes.
I was just doing audiobooks. But I think that your use of your commute time is a little bit more involved, and I commend you for that, because commute time is like a lot of time, So
It is.
You've found like a really good way to use that commute time.
Right. And like you said, I listen to audiobooks constantly too. I mean, I probably only record one episode a week, so all my other commute time is spent listening to audiobooks. So I am fully on that bandwagon.
Nice. Yeah. We've got audiences members saying that that's actually a good use for your commute time too. So it looks like we're all on the same page here. Okay. So the topic that we've engaged in each other's comments sections about like various topics, but like the first thing that brought us together was nominalism. Right. And I've joked that I'm just going to rebrand my channel to the Nominalism Show, because that seems like it's the only thing that I talk about now, which is so silly. Like it's like, I don't know how that happened, but it did. It turned into the only thing that I talk about. But
well, what's interesting is that, I mean, as far as I know, there aren't a ton of people talking about it. At least on YouTube.
Yeah.
A lot of the more famous, at least philosophical channels, they don't really broach the subject very often. Although I think it undergirds a lot of where they're coming from.
Yeah. And that's both true and weird, because according to the Phil papers, like over a third of all of professional philosophers or nominalists, and then like another third are like moderate realists, and then another
Uh-huh.
third are like Platonic realists. It's like pretty evenly split. But for what,
Wow, that
yeah,
shocks me.
yeah, it's pretty
Like,
evenly split. But for whatever reason, um, YouTube seems to be primarily, probably primarily moderate realists, and maybe that's just because of the channels that I
right.
watch. But like a full third of philosophers are nominalists and Platonists, and I feel like there's not a ton of nominalists and Platonists on YouTube for whatever reason.
No, there's not. There's not. And I think that's unfortunate, certainly, because like you're really the first kind of full-fledged nominalist that I've found to talk to. Even like atheist friends and things, they end up being realists in the end.
Huh? That's
So
interesting.
we at least have that base, you know. But you're honestly the first full-fledged nominalist that I've been able to have a conversation with. So that's why I really have wanted to hone in on this with you, just to hear, because you know it can be, for me it can be kind of a sounding board. Like I just hear my own stuff back at me, or people that believe the same things or similar things as me as regards this issue. And so to hear somebody who's been on both sides, but then also is now firmly seated on the nominalist
Eh,
side, I'm really excited.
firm might be a little bit of a over exaggeration there, but
Okay, that's
you
fair.
know,
That's fair.
I have my opinions, but my like the one thing that I always say is that I reserve the right to change my opinion at the drop of a dime. Like
Sure.
all it takes is one argument or some little piece of evidence that all of a sudden I'll be like, oh wait, yeah, hold on. So in the middle of this very conversation, I very well might change my mind. Um,
Well, and the thing is I hope everybody's like that to a certain extent. You know,
Me
if
too.
you're so entrenched in an ideal that you're not willing to actively listen to another person, and active listening meaning like willing to be changed by what you're hearing, then I think you're really doing a disservice to yourself and to the other person. So um, I commend you for that. I guess when I say firm, I mean more of you take, that's the stance that you take currently,
Yeah.
correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's firm in the sense that like I've spent time thinking about it.
Mhm.
And like if you asked me why, I'd be able to like kind of list a few reasons why I think it's the most probable. And I've listened to a lot of the arguments on the other side, and then I fall on this one side. Um, but I've changed my mind pretty like drastically on things in the past after reading like a
Mhm.
single paper and then being like, wow, this paper makes so much sense to me. Like I'm in. Um, so it seems totally plausible that could happen again, and I become a realist. Um,
Sure.
and if I am to kind of speculate, which I always try to avoid, but if I am to speculate, I think that something like the things that would bring me way closer to realism would be like there's interesting work being done about realism in terms of um, things in physics. So some philosophers want to argue that like quantum fields are universals, and then if they are, then realism is true. Um,
Sure.
I'm going to be honest and say that I'm just a lowly chemical engineer, so I don't fully understand anything quantum related.
Yeah,
Um,
me neither.
so I tend not to get all quantum-y, and I actually tend to be pretty skeptical of too many philosophical positions that rely on quantum physics because I know enough to know how much I don't know. And I'm afraid that some people don't know enough to know how much they don't know, if that makes sense. Um,
Sure.
so I
You,
try not to
I
get too
think that's very
quantum.
true.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't mind starting a conversation without not even getting into um, nominalism per se so far, but I want to get your opinions on nominalism and Catholicism. Um, Daniel, who left a whole bunch of comments last night, and will probably watch this when he wakes up, and today, tomorrow,
Yeah.
left a similar question to a question that I wanted to start with. So I am just going to start with his question. So he starts off by saying, through his dialogues with me, he's discovered that he too has some nominalist friendly tendencies in his own thinking, but notably, Daniel is Catholic, a committed Catholic. Now, Daniel is not the kind of Catholic that I was when I was Catholic. So I was very trad. I grew up FSSP. Daniel is a very philosophically informed Catholic in the spirit of Vatican II. So very different.
He's
And
probably along the same lines as me.
okay,
I would imagine.
cool. And so Daniel says that he's getting specifically into transubstantiation because transubstantiation was one of my sticking points with like why I argued in the past that nominalism and Catholicism really can't mix because of transubstantiation. But Daniel's point here is that the real presence is the dogma. The transubstantiation itself is not the dogma. Transubstantiation is a way to explain the real presence, and transubstantiation is not compatible with nominalism. But that's not the same thing as saying the real presence is not compatible with nominalism. He goes on to say Luther had nominalistic tendencies, so couldn't a like post-Vatican II church have some kind of non-transubstantiation version of the real presence in which nominalism is totally compatible? So I think the question here is, why are you spending so much time worrying about nominalism, Kevin? It seems to me,
Yeah.
says Daniel, that nominalism and Catholicism are like, they can play nice together. So I guess before we even dive into what nominalism is, I want to get your thoughts on that. Can nominalism and Catholicism play nice together? Or do you think, like I at least thought, and I'm still kind of undecided, do you think that they don't play so nice together? What do you think?
So here, my thoughts on this, whether they play nice together, are I think that it can, on the surface, in a lot of ways, appear to play nice together. But I think nominalism particularly introduces a lot of logical inconsistencies into a Catholic worldview, particularly one based in either Aquinas, Scotus, Augustine, things of that nature, right? Now, there certainly have been Catholics in the past who have been staunch nominalists. Foremost among them is William of Ockham.
Yep, the OG.
So he really, and Peter Abelard. I think a lot of people argue that Peter Abelard was also a nominalist. Mm-hmm. And I think that's probably true. Some people have argued that Boethius is a nominalist. I'm not very convinced of that, but I don't have very good reasons not to be convinced. I'm just skeptical. I haven't done enough reading yet, but so there certainly have been Catholics in the past, and I'm sure there are plenty of them now who are nominalists. But really, my goal with focusing on this issue as much as I do, because I have a whole playlist of probably 15 videos on the subject, and have done numerous Facebook posts, as Kevin alluded to earlier. My whole goal is to really make people aware of this issue, that this is even in existence, because most people clearly don't think about it a whole lot.
Yes.
And I want to highlight the importance of it, because it really gets down to the depths of our metaphysical, it gets to the metaphysical bases of what we believe philosophically. And that really goes past theology into just pure philosophy. Okay. Like I've said, I mean, I have plenty of atheist friends who are realists. I have plenty of, well, actually, I really don't have any atheist friends who are nominalists at this point, except you, Kevin.
Hey.
But
I call myself an agnostic, but
yeah, okay, fair enough.
I'm okay
yeah,
with the atheist label. Like, I don't really mind as long as we know what we mean.
You're agnostic about being atheist.
Yeah, there you go.
Yeah. So, no, but to circle back around, why do I think it is such a big issue with Catholicism? I think mainly you can look at a few different doctrines and dogmas of the Catholic faith. Transubstantiation, well, the real presence is one of them. I would push back on his interpretation that transubstantiation is not a dogma, because it certainly was dogmatized by the Council of Trent, but what exactly he means there. I think the wording in the Council of Trent, to my recollection, is something like, "This is the best way that we know how to explain what's going on." Okay, they don't claim to say this is exactly what's going on, but that with our human limitations, this is the best way we understand of how this is going on. Okay, and they use the word transubstantiation. That's my understanding of what Trent's understanding was. All right. So, but I think there are plenty of other Catholic dogmas that you can put on the table as really death nails in the coffin for the Catholic nominalists. And I think chief among them are the Christological dogmas of the first few councils of the Church. Those against Arianism, Nestorianism, monothelitism, things like that. I think that those, they really they take for granted, but then also explicitly state that human nature exists, and they formulate those Christological doctrines based upon the existence of human nature, and also divine nature, right? And I guess I don't see any other way to understand human nature as real unless you believe in the existence of universals, okay? And the existence of giving a positive assent to the existence of universals is what defines realism as opposed to nominalism, okay? And then you split it off, like Kevin was saying, into the two main camps of realism, of moderate or Aristotelian, neo-Aristotelian realism, whatever you want to call it, and then Platonic realism, okay? So, and the Catholic Church has taken both of those different types of realism into itself at various points in time. I would say the whole first millennium was largely Platonic in its outlook on realism, and then the whole second millennium up until today, I think most of the theology as it has developed has been rooted in an Aristotelian, neo-Aristotelian realism. Okay?
Yeah.
Or
Since Aquinas,
realism,
more or less. Like since Aquinas, it's been pretty moderately real.
Yeah, since Aquinas, Scotus, Albert the Great, a number of others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then you have people like William of Ockham coming on the scene right after that, right? Who are pushing against that and saying, whoa, this seems a little too complex and really unnecessary. And so then he therefore, right, he attributes the existence of universals basically to the mind. Or to speech, really. But so I think the Christological doctrines are probably some of the clearest examples where Catholics, I don't think, that's one of the biggest reasons why I don't think a Catholic can be a nominalist, is because of the Christological doctrines in particular, and because of the belief in human nature. Because the Christological doctrines are bound up that we believe that Jesus is fully human, he has a full human nature, and he has a full divine nature, right? And for him to have a full human nature, it has to be real. I think that's just, I don't see any other way around that logically. And so maybe Kevin, you'll push back on that, but
I don't think I will too much.
I don't see a way around it.
Yeah. Let me like, let me put on like my Jesuit hat and try, like, I'll kind of try to like think about this in like some kind of nominalistic way. So the move
mid 19th century to present Jesuit hat.
Yes. Right? Yeah. That's a good qualifier there. But so just like how the move for transubstantiation could be, and the Jesuits do make this move where, so the real presence is the dogma, not transubstantiation. So we can understand the real presence. Well, actually, no, frankly, we can't understand the real presence. So we just kind of make this move to an appeal to mystery. And we just say, sure, it's not substances that are transubstantiating, but it's somehow there's the real presence. It's a mystery. Don't worry about it. Move on. Can we make a similar move? Yeah, right. Can we make a similar move with natures? So, hey, there's no universals. So some kind of concrete nature of a man was like instantiated within the human body of Jesus Christ. That's why Jesus had this, nature, and maybe we need a new word to describe what this thing is because it's not a universal. So maybe it's, a concrete nature, we'll call it. He had the concrete nature of a man. And how exactly does that work? I don't know. Don't worry about it. Appeal to mystery.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Right.
Maybe.
And I think that those those two examples, I think you can lump them together, and I think what the biggest issue there, I think, would be a misunderstanding of Catholic theology and how the magisterium works, the teaching office of the church. And like it would, if you could say that, I think it's clearly a slippery slope down to saying that any dogma that's been defined in the past, you can just use that same logic around in order to redefine it.
Which
Right? So,
which I'm a big fan of, but
sure,
I'm
sure.
also not Catholic, so it's probably not surprising.
Yeah. Right. So I think unless you're also going to say that dogmas are not absolute, okay, in their wording, even when they're dogmatized, I think that's the only way around it, is to go there. And in my view of Catholicism, in my understanding of Catholicism, that renders Catholicism meaningless at that point.
And I'm not really going to push back too hard on that, for, I guess, the main reason being I don't call myself Catholic anymore. So,
Sure.
you know, whether or not a certain understanding of Catholicism becomes meaningless thanks to a, you know, adoption of nominalism, that's kind of not my fight. What I do want to quickly bring up, though, and one thing that I don't like a whole lot about the appeal to mystery is the appeal to mystery.
Yeah.
This could be a product of my very, you know, empirical education, my very empirical mind, but I find an appeal to mystery just to be deeply unsatisfying. Something that I really appreciate about the Council of Trent is that the Council of Trent is pretty much saying, boldly, hey, this is how we think it happens. We think that there's this substance, and the one substance leaves and the other substance comes in, and the accidents don't change. That's why we don't actually see a change, but we know it's got to happen. So they're making like a bold stance, and they're explaining the mechanism by which it happens. Now, I have my own problems with the mechanism itself, but at least there is a mechanism. When we make this appeal to mystery, we're saying we don't know the mechanism. Like, we have no idea. So what's better? Trying to explain something, or like not even trying to explain it? Well,
right. Yes, I like that.
The better thing is probably being honest, right? So if you truly don't know, then like you should admit that you truly don't know. So in that way, I can respect the kind of moderate, like the modern Jesuit movement, to be like, yeah, we just plain old don't know. Okay, I respect that, sure. But then I'm going to argue, if you truly don't know, like, why are you so dogmatically believing it? Like, that's like a little weird to be so dogmatic about something that you just, like, frankly have no understanding of.
Exactly.
At least those who hold to the Council of Trent can claim to have a mechanism. Now, again, I have my problems with the mechanism, but there at least is one. So that's kind of something that I find, like, I'm not as willing to embrace the mystery as I think the kind of the Vatican II theologian is willing to embrace the mystery, if that makes sense.
Yeah. And there's, you know, whatever that means, the Vatican II theologian, you know, is kind of a big question mark, I think.
Sure.
And you know, that's a whole nother stream of videos we can do. But,
yeah, it sure is.
I mean, my goodness, it's that's a massive part of inter-Catholic debates right now, as you know. So
yeah. When I'm saying the Vatican II theologian, I'm referring to like the von Belshazzars and stuff. Like, that's kind of like the mindset that I'm thinking of.
Okay.
So you can think of it like the modern Jesuit.
Where there's kind of there's a clear break with the past,
right?
The Catholic thinking in the past.
Right. That's what I'm referring to. Now, am I being super charitable when I refer to Vatican II theologians with this super broad brushstroke? No, I'm probably not being very charitable when I'm painting with such a. And should I paint with such a broad brush? No, I definitely shouldn't. But that is what I mean.
Well, I mean, and you and I have had conversations before, going off of that Facebook post that I made about polemics, and I think that, you know, I think you are right in what you had said to me, that, you know, my post was polemical, but that's not bad. That doesn't mean it's bad, right? Polemics is not necessarily a bad thing. And
It's a
so
tool.
it's a tool, right? Right. And especially if you're trying to get people to think about an issue that probably they never have and maybe never will again. Sometimes you gotta do something that catches their attention. You know, is that slightly dishonest? I don't really think so. I don't think it's even slightly dishonest. But I think it's a rhetorical tool, um, and
Yeah, I would
it's useful.
I would say it's only dishonest if somebody's using it dishonestly. It's a tool.
Yeah,
It's
right,
just a tool.
right, yeah,
So
yes, I agree.
I don't think it's honest or dishonest in a vacuum. I think it's just a tool that you can use, and if you're doing it to rile up your base because you want them to go to war with another nation, yeah, that might be. And it's some false flag operation. Sure, that's dishonest. But if you're just
Right,
doing it because you
right,
want your audience to think about an issue, I don't think there's anything dishonest about that.
right.
Um,
If I had made my Facebook post so that I made Kevin O'Connor mad, that would be quite a terrible intention, would it not?
yes, yeah.
So, um, yeah,
So I guess on the kind of language polemics subject, I think that the word, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think that the word that really caught my attention in that Facebook post was infect. I think it was something
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
nominalism, like has nominalism infected, something like that. So
yeah,
I take it that you have a fairly negative view of maybe the impact of nominalism on somebody's life, or maybe like the moral fruits of nominalism are bad, or something like that. Um, I'm wondering. Do you want to unpack that for me for a minute? Like,
yeah.
why did you use the
I
word
can.
infect?
Yeah. So, and it was used very intentionally. I'll say that as a polemical tool, but also um, because I do think, at least in part, in certain circles, I think that is the reality. Um, and chief among, I think there's two chief examples of this that I see consistently, and it would be that I do think nominalism has infected Catholicism, or at least many Catholics. It has infected many Catholics, their thinking, and it creates, like I was alluding to earlier, it creates logical inconsistencies, I believe, between this metaphysical uh, base in their philosophical paradigm of nominalism. So they have a nominalistic base in their philosophical paradigm, but then they try to top the cake with Catholic theology, and there's a real disconnect there in my understanding, in my view. And I think that in that it is an infection, in that it's something that starts small and seems uh, non-lethal in the moment, but as it grows and it spreads throughout the body, you start to see the issues uh, more clearly as it spreads. So I do think, you know, just taking the example of Catholicism, modern Catholicism, I think that nominalism has been an infection in many ways. And you could widen that to Christianity in general, and then you could widen it further to the culture in general. And I think, as looking at the culture in general, I think that as we have espoused nominalism more and more into our worldview, we start to be more bold in the conclusions that we come to from that philosophical base. And I think the case in point on this is the transgenderism crisis, what I would consider to be the transgenderism crisis, where I start to view myself, my reality, um, as separate from my body, as a separate entity from my body, and I need to make my body in conformity to how I feel myself is. Okay, like starting to lop off parts of our body because we feel that we are not um, that our bodies are not in conformity with ourself. Okay, I think that is an example of nominalism, and I think it's also an example of a type of Platonic realism, maybe too, um, where that reality, uh, it's a very dark conclusion, I think, um, to those metaphysical bases. So I don't know what your thoughts are on transgenderism, um, but I
Card
maybe tell me.
cards on the table. I bought a shirt yesterday. Not yesterday. I bought a shirt 2 weeks ago or something. That says "Protect Trans Kentuckians." The proceeds of that shirt was going to fight against Kentucky's Senate Bill 150, which is a bill that's going to make it a lot harder for trans people to get the care that they want. Um,
Okay.
my personal view on transubstantiation, wow, on transgenderism is that adults should be able to do what they want to do. I'm pretty libertarian when it comes to that.
Okay.
Um,
Okay.
so cards on the table. That's where I'm at.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I try not to let that kind of dictate the philosophical conversation around it. But I'm fairly libertarian when it comes to most of that stuff.
So if you're, I mean, this would be the classic question. If you're libertarian, wouldn't you just say, like, what about the people who really feel strongly about people not being able to do that sort of thing? Is their freedom being respected in that instance?
No, because you don't have a freedom to not like it. I don't have a freedom to not let you be Catholic, for instance. Like that's not my
Oh, I
freedom.
see. Okay.
You being Catholic is a freedom. Me not wanting you to be Catholic is not a freedom. That's the opposite of a freedom. So
Oh, I got you.
yeah, yeah,
All
yeah.
right, all right. I was thinking about it a little backwards. Okay,
Yeah.
I see. Yeah.
Um,
Anyway, yeah.
but you kind of touched on something when you said that you think that nominalism is a an underlying reason that might like undergird the like acceptance of trans people today. Um,
And I want to make it clear, like there are so many different links that lead you from having your nominalistic base to the conclusion that transgenderism is okay. Like it may not seem terribly consistent for me to say something like that in the moment, but I don't know if we have time for me to lay out all the different links
yeah,
there.
yeah.
Um,
Um,
but
if I may though, so I kind of want to, because then you said something about Platonism at the end. You said like possibly there's
mhm.
some kind of Platonic realism that's going on here, and I'm gonna quickly bring up a paper that I was reading the other day. You should be able to see this. It's gonna replace you, so sorry about that.
Yeah.
But here's this essay. It's called, and I'm gonna like try to. It's called "The Metaphysics of Gender, Essence, or Existence" from 2019. I guess I'm gonna have to zoom. Okay, it's a little off center, but you'll be able to see it. This is an essay from Xavier College, and the point of this essay is pretty much, hey, we think of transgenderism in fiercely realist terms. We think that somebody's gender is a substance, and that transgenderism is a transubstantiation in as much
Right.
as the accidents of a person do not change, but the substance of that person does change. The argument laid out in this essay, The Metaphysics of Gender, Essence, or Existence, are shockingly similar to the arguments laid out at the Council of Trent for transubstantiation. So
Sure.
I actually think of transgenderism as kind of realist. And now you might say, Kevin, you're a nominalist. You just said that you support trans people, but you don't think that realism is correct. And I do kind of think that a lot of transgenderism relies on realist principles. So my
And like I said, I would agree to that as regards Platonism.
I mean,
Platonic
even
realism.
moderate realism, I think you could understand transubstantiation in like a moderately real way, because
Um,
the Catholic doesn't have to have a Platonic understanding of transubstantiation.
no, I think the Catholic, so transubstantiation I think is a bit of a category error. Um, because it's not a purely philosophical, it's not a purely natural argument. Okay. it uses philosophical language to describe a theological reality, right? But ultimately, it would be God in that instance being the object of or being the transformer, right? The one doing the transformation. But as regards the natural world, and I think this is where transgenderism, I don't think God comes into it at all. If the person was saying God transformed me into a woman or a man, like something like that, that might be a slightly different conversation, maybe. But I think largely we're talking about the person themselves having this understanding, this reality, and I think that, like I said, that is where Platonic realism, I think, can lead, and that's why I'm not a Platonic realist. Largely, is because I do agree that it can that transgenderism can certainly be argued from a Platonic realist point of view. Um, but I guess here's what I'm getting at. My understanding of moderate realism, and this would be my own understanding of realism, would be that once the physical reality uh, is is destroyed, the substance is destroyed. So once the accidents are destroyed, then the substance is destroyed. Okay. So if you have a chair and you're saying, what is the chairness? What is the chairness of this chair? Once I destroy the chair by a moderate realist point of view, right, the chair no longer exists. Chairness only in exists only insofar as individual chairs exist. Okay, right? That'd be the moderate realist point of view. Human nature only exists insofar as individual human beings exist, but it does exist. Um, it's just only insofar as the physical realities that we call a human being exist. So my problem with transgenderism would be, I think you're right. It is more so that it's platonic, but I think a lot of times a nominalistic point of view, it can lead towards a dualism. I think, um, and it depends on what kind of nominalism you mean. There are various forms of nominalism, right? There's ones that focus more upon the mind itself. There's some that say that existent, the universal just simply does not exist at all. Um, but and sorry, I might be losing the thread here a little bit.
You
But
mind if I kind of
um,
um poke and prod at the
yeah,
uh
please.
so what I'm going to focus on for a second is just I don't think that the platonic versus moderate distinction actually comes too much into play here, and let me tell you why.
Okay.
um
Okay. Interesting.
uh a Catholic is totally at will to believe in transubstantiation, even in a moderately real sense. The only thing that needs to be a thing with existence in order for transubstantiation to make sense is substances. So as long as there is some Eucharist with the substance of bread, right? As long as there is some kind of unleavened bread that has bread substance, and as long as there is some God with God substance, transubstantiation is on the table as an option. Um, and as long as there is some
Sure.
male with male substance, and as long as there is some female with female substance, transubstantiation is on the table. Whether or not those substances are embedded in specific instances of bread, specific substances, instances of gods, specific instances of men, and specific instances of women, or whether or not those substances exist outside of those specific instances is kind of a moot point for the sake of talking about transubstantiation. Um, and I think that the Catholic might want to be cautious of trying to say that this modern gender theory understanding of substances has to rely on Platonic realism, because then it seems like, well, then the Catholic can't understand transubstantiation under a moderately real worldview either. Like the Catholic then would need to rely on Platonism too. And I don't think that either needs to rely on Platonism. I think that either could rely on either Platonism or moderate realism.
Sure. So I think I wouldn't. I'm not. Yeah, I'm not yet convinced that the moderate realist paradigm fits well with transgenderism. I don't think you've yet convinced me, and here's why. If I am a transgender person, I'm somebody who identifies as transgender, and I see my body, I'm a male. Everything that about me indicates that I'm a male, except for my mind. Or, maybe I'm a platonic realist and I believe it's myself, right? Um, if I believe that myself is different from my body, or could be different from my body, then I think therefore I don't see how that, if I believe that myself is different from my body, I don't see how that's compatible with moderate realism. Because the chairness could never be different from the physical composition of the chair itself, um, without there being a destruction of that composite being. Okay, does that make sense? Like,
Um, so I don't think I'm on board, and let me kind of explain why.
mhm.
So the transubstantiation proponent wouldn't argue that the accidents of the bread must be destroyed in order for the substance of the bread to leave the bread, right? So the transubstantiation proponent would say that every single day the accidents of the bread do not get destroyed. Yet the substance of bread leaves the accidents of the bread, and the substance of the body, blood, soul, and divinity of Jesus Christ enters the accidents of the bread. And so I think that by that same, what's sauce for the goose is sauce for the gander. I think somebody would be able to make the argument that the accidents of men do not need to be destroyed in order for the substance of women to enter the accidents of man.
So you're saying, okay, so the argument is basically because of transubstantiation, the Catholic dogma of transubstantiation, you can apply the same logic to transgenderism, and it makes sense. And I think
Well,
there
the making sense part is where I'm
is
actually
a,
not entirely on board because I'm a
yeah,
nominalist.
I don't think it makes, I still, as a realist, I still don't think it makes sense because again, transubstantiation, the the transformer is God. And again, unless you're, I don't think it's a similar enough situation to make such a comparison. Um,
Maybe I can ask a couple questions and see if this will help. So, do you think
sure.
it's possible for something to have the accidents of one thing but the substance of another?
It is possible, but not naturally.
I don't know what that means.
It's possible, um, but there's something above the natural going on for that to happen. That could never happen within nature itself. That could never happen where
Are
nature is the
substances part of
transformer.
nature?
I would argue in a very real way, yes. From a
Ah,
moderate realist point of
interesting.
view, I would argue yes.
So,
And
most
other
realists would
moderate
say
realists
no.
might disagree with me about
Yeah.
that. But
Do you
um,
think that do you think that there's anything empirical at all about substances?
yeah, I think the physical realities that I think this is precisely why I'm a moderate realist is because what is empirical about the substance is the accidents.
I don't think you want to go there. And the reason I'm saying that is because we can look at the accidents of a Eucharist after transubstantiation and
Sure.
they would still be the accidents of bread. I don't think that you and I would disagree
Again,
about that.
no. Again, I'm talking on the natural plane without God being
But
anywhere.
if the substances are natural and we can determine the substance of something by looking at the accidents,
Mhm.
then we can look at the accidents of a host after consecration and then determine that the substance is what the accidents are.
I think you can, on the natural plane that would be possible. but not upon this. This is where there's a break. This is where there's a disconnect between the example of transubstantiation and transgenderism.
Well, so
They're
to
two
me,
completely different things.
that would prompt me, if I was being a realist, to simply say no. Substances are not empirical. And that's the move that pretty much every single realist makes. So substances,
I guess.
I mean, and you don't have to make that move. There's a minority view where philosophers do want to argue that substances are indeed empirical, but those people tend to try to insist that the only substances that exist are like, positive charge is a substance. Negative charge is a substance. Gravity is a substance. But besides those things, there are no other substances. And the weak nuclear force, the strong nuclear force. There's probably like a few other substances, but then those philosophers are arguing for like a really naturalistic kind of realism, and that was what I was alluding to earlier about like the kind of realism that I might be closer to being on board with. But the philosophers who have this more robust realism, like a realism that somebody like Aquinas would hold, simply assert that substances are not empirical. That's why transubstantiation works. Because go ahead, look at the accidents all you want, dummy. The accidents aren't going to tell you anything, So the substance of what a thing is entirely and is essentially entirely divorceable from the accidents. That is the mechanism by which transubstantiation can occur. That's why you can't just look at bread and say, this is definitely just bread.
No, I mean, I would say that the mechanism by which transubstantiation can occur is God.
Well, the mechanism by which the real presence occurs is transubstantiation, right?
Sure.
And that's kind of what I'm referring to when I say
okay.
Because I think the Catholic would say that the mechanism by which everything occurs is God, right? So you're not really saying a whole lot when you say.
I mean, I think that's a debatable thing. Like, it depends on what emphasis how you're willing to emphasize that. Does everything that occurs occur because of God?
Yes.
I don't think necessarily. Everything has occurred because of God. But I do think there is a legitimacy to individual action. Now, everything is held in existence because of God, but is that an active thing? No. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, that's why I made the point where I don't think that like saying that transubstantiation is something that God does is a particularly interesting claim when it's made by a theist, because
no, it's not a particularly interesting claim. I don't think transubstantiation is a particularly interesting claim unless you're a Catholic. Again, like there's this is precisely why I'm saying it seems to be a bit of a category error connecting the two, transubstantiation and transgenderism, because I really think you're talking about two completely different sets of instances that can't be compared. They only seem to be similar. If transubstantiation could happen on a natural level, then you could compare that to transgenderism. But because transubstantiation cannot occur upon a natural level by only natural means, I don't think you can compare it. And I think that's probably because I view substances as in some way empirical. But does that mean that you can find them under a microscope? No, I think that you can find them through their accidents. You can see you can understand the reality of substances through their accidents. They point to the substance. And in that way, it is empirical. Okay, I guess that's what I mean by saying that a substance is empirical.
I'm still
but can
not.
You see it under, and this may be where we're getting into the nitty gritty of all this.
Yeah.
And my worldview is kind of, I'm still working it out.
Oh, same. Same.
Which is perfectly fine. I mean, everybody does that. So, and this is good. This is why I love these kinds of conversations, because it helps me shore up my view, and it helps you as well. It helps, and the viewers. I mean, these are, and I'm not saying this because I'm trying to run away from the topic.
This
is the reality.
I run away from topics all the time.
These are really difficult.
Yeah, I run away from topics all the time. One of my favorite moves is like, holy shoot, I've never thought about that before. Would you mind if you give me like a couple weeks just to think about this and then get back to you? Like, I do that all the time.
I am going to be I'm going to be thinking about what you're asking me here for probably the next month or two, or
Yeah,
whenever we talk.
I do that
next,
all the time.
Because, and this is precisely why I wanted to talk with you, because I knew that you would ask me questions that I couldn't ask myself, because I'm not looking at things at reality from your viewpoint, right?
Yeah.
That nominalistic viewpoint. And so again, I've been in a lot of a sounding board in a lot of ways. And so I haven't been able to shore up my view as strongly as I think it could be, because I'm not talking to people who disagree with me.
Um, Real quick on this
Anyway.
topic, and then I'm just looking at the time and realizing it's been close to an hour. There was one more topic that I wanted to get to, and then Q&A. But just real quick, just a quick point of agreement is that the way that I view myself and my channel is kind of like a foil to all of Catholic YouTube, and I think that foils in this kind of like educational dialectic context are super helpful, because I think about the truth as being somewhere here. And then if I'm over here somewhere and the Catholic is over here somewhere, and if I can pull the Catholic this way, and if the Catholic can pull me this way, then we both win. We both get closer to the truth.
I agree.
So
I fully
agree.
Yeah.
So I think that well, I hope that my channel serves as a mechanism that other people pull me closer to the truth, and that I pull other people closer to the truth, and then that would just make me a really happy boy. So I that was the one point of agreement I wanted to make, was that conversations like the one that we're having right now are super important.
Yes. Can I ask? So I would completely copy everything you just said about my own channel. That's precisely what I'm attempting to do. Can I ask, from a nominalistic point of view, how do you understand that truth that you speak of? So like, how does that?
Yeah. Are you familiar with fictionalism?
It's like I've read a few things on it. You might have to
in brief
jog my memory.
Fictionalism is when like a nominalist talks as if they are a realist, but they're not admitting to it in like a metaphysically like real kind of way. They're just using the language because it's convenient. So if you said like, "Hey Kevin, does the truth exist?" and I'm just like out on the street, I might be like, "Yeah, sure. What are you talking about?" But if you and I are talking like, "Do you think that the truth exists?"
Right.
I would tell you, strictly speaking, no. I don't think that truth is some kind of platonically real thing that exists inside of Plato's cave. I don't think that you think that the truth exists inside of Plato's cave either. I think that you have a moderately real conception of truth, and I have a nominalist conception of truth. So my nominalist conception of truth is that there is some reality, and when I say certain things, some of those things will comport with reality. Some of them won't.
Right.
So
if I do the exact same thing, like I will say, when I'm giving the example of the chair, I'll say, well, and we call it a chair. No, we don't call it a chair by the realist point of view. That's a nominalistic point of view. But what it is the chair. Right. So anyway.
Yeah. And so like this is coffee. That comports with reality. This is Coca-Cola. That does not comport with reality. So right. I said I didn't use the word true in what I just said, but I could have pretty much said it's true that this is coffee. It's false that this is Coca-Cola. That would have gotten the same point across. But if me saying it is true that this is coffee entails that truth is something that is at least moderately real, then maybe I should avoid that. So I should say it comports with reality that this is coffee. But I speak with the vulgar. That's what they'll say. Like not vulgar as in like curse words, but vulgar as in like the common folk. So I speak with the common folk when I say it's true that this is coffee. So that's my nominalistic, friendly understanding of truth. If you don't mind, and if you think that this is going to take way too long, just say so, and we'll save it for the next episode. But we've talked a lot about really good stuff in terms of nominalism and realism, but we haven't actually gotten to why you think that realism is true and why I think that nominalism is true yet. And we've been at this for just about an hour. I would love to dive into that, and I think that I could keep mine to about 2 minutes. And then would you want to do like a 2-minute, hey, this is why I think that realism is true kind of thing? Or do you think 2 minutes is just not enough and we should? Yeah, what do you think?
I think I could do it. Of course, giving an elevator pitch doesn't give all the the gory details and everything, and you can poke plenty of holes in them. But I'm
okay.
I can do that.
I'll go first, I guess, for why I think that nominalism is a more accurate understanding of reality than realism. So, at the face of it, human beings see different men, for example, and they think, there must be this thing that unites them all together, because my brain recognizes that, hey, here's an example of a man and then a man, and I just kind of mean humans here. I guess we could do like literally males too, it doesn't matter. But what is this thing that ties them all together? They are all different instances, but they must have this one unifying thing, because my brain recognizes them all as the same thing. So what is this thing that ties them all together? It must be the substance. This is like intuitive. It at the face of it, it seems totally plausible. However, when you dive deeper, it seems to me to be the less parsimonious worldview. What do I mean by parsimony? I just mean cheapness. How expensive is it to believe something? William of Ockham, I think, was right when he said that you shouldn't multiply things into your ontology without necessity. And I think that I can actually perfectly well explain why the human brain sees similarities in different instances of humans without there needing to be a substance of humanity. To explain that, I'm going to rely on things like neurons in the human brain, evolutionary processes that crafted the neurons to be really adept at catching photons that bounce off of other mereological symbols arranged human-wise, and then the pattern recognition that was built into the neuron structure of our brain through natural selection is really good at saying like, human, human, human. And so we have this intuition that there must be this substance that ties them all together. But I can explain everything without substances. And since I view substances as being entirely unfalsifiable, that is to say, substances cannot be detected empirically, since I cannot falsify them, and since I don't need them for my explanation, I am going to kind of just shave them off using Occam's razor. If I was to kind of list one because that's kind of like a negative argument for nominalism. If I am to make one positive case, it would be the argument from causal inertness, which is kind of similar, but a little bit different. I think that something that is causally inert has no solid reason for us to think that it exists. I think that substances are causally inert. Therefore, I think that we have no solid reasons to think that substances exist. That would pretty much
define causal inertness for us real quick.
Yeah, so causal inertness might just mean the exact same thing as unfalsifiable, in as much as there is no causation going on in substances. Substances do not cause anything to happen, and substances are not caused by anything, as far as we can tell. A lot of philosophers who are kind of more empirically minded like me might reformulate this into something having to do with the first law of thermodynamics, whereby we can look at like all of the energy in a closed system and we know exactly where all that energy goes. We see no evidence of any kind of energy that is being like absorbed by a substance or put out by a substance. We know where all the energy goes. All of it is accounted for. So there's just no causal power to this thing that we are calling a substance. All of the causal power lies in the neurons and the photons and the lenses in my eye. So if all of the causality is being exhausted by all of the stuff, then there's simply no room for any causality to be left over for the substance. And if there's simply no causality at all, we have no way of detecting it. And if we have no way of detecting it, we should probably just not posit it as something with authentic existence. That was probably more than 2 minutes, so I'll go ahead and stop there. But that's kind of like my elevator pitch for nominalism.
Okay. And I'll do a similar thing. I'll probably give a negative argument and a positive argument. So the negative argument would be something like this. We see, this is basically going to be the inverse of what you just said. So we automatically attribute substances into reality. We automatically do that. That is something completely natural that we do. I don't think the mind needs to think about it too much in order to understand what exactly is going on. And because we automatically see, we acknowledge those substantial realities in existence, I think that in and of itself needs to be taken seriously and not simply attributed to empirical um, realities in our physiology. Okay. Uh, so that would be kind of the negative argument given very loosely. The positive argument would be something like this. There is, um, I see my son, and he, before having really much self reflection at all, he's maybe 3, 4 weeks old. He looks at me and he smiles. He recognizes something beautiful there. I think the argument from beauty is one of the most profound for realism, and that would be that even from our birth, before we're able to cognizantly, we're before we're able to do meta analysis on ourselves, right? We're able to think about how we're thinking. Um, Even from birth, we witness these uh, transcendentals, beauty in particular, I would argue. Um, and I think that that is something very much worth pursuing and worth acknowledging within reality. I think there's two ways to go here. The nominalist goes, okay, well that's because of what's going on upon the mind and the neurons and all of that. The realist steps back and he says, oh well, there's something greater going on here. I think largely it's a matter of emphasis. Do you emphasize the empirical reality out there as being real, or do you emphasize the mind as being the reality? Is the empirical the source of that beauty, or is the mind the source? And I find personally, I find the empirical reality as being the source. Um, I find that a much more plausible uh, instance, and I also find it um, more verifiable in a real way because you're looking at something outside the self. Now you could even argue. I think I could kind of flip this around, and I could say, well, the neurons in my brain, that is, even if I'm looking at your brain, let's say, Kevin, I'm looking at the neurons in your brain. Well, that is a reality outside of my own mind that is showing me that there is some sort of real entity there, that is real substance there, that is creating, that is acknowledging what's going on within the neurons, right? Um, so I think even the neurological argument from the nominalist, it can be, when you're looking at it upon your own brain, I think the argument makes a little bit more sense. But if I look upon it upon your own brain, right? It just depends on what kind of ideal I want to put into that. Is it purely physical? Is it purely a physical reality? And somehow that physical, the neurons are creating the illusion of substance. Um, sure, that's possible, I guess. But how do you jump from the physical reality of the neurons to the illusion of substance? That's also a huge question that you know I'm not positing any answers there. I'm just poking holes. But um, I guess that's the 2 minute elevator pitch. It's probably not super succinct, but
Mine wasn't either. So
there you go.
so we're
Yeah,
we're even.
there you go.
Cool.
Yeah. Right.
Okay. Can I ask you one audience question and then we'll wrap it up?
Yeah.
Perfect. Okay. So Daniel from earlier wants to know, what's your view on the existence of God? Is God, so if God is not the old man in the sky, what is he? Is he the supreme being? Is he the ground of all being? Or is he the phenomenal universal mind, etc.? So take it away. What do you think?
Yeah, he's definitely not a guy in the sky. That's for sure. Uh, what God would be, I think the best and quickest answer to this would be being itself. Um, and what exactly that means is really really difficult to peer much further into that. We know what being is, we know what individual beings are, and so therefore you try to make one jump further and you try to say being itself. um, what does that mean? The source of all existence itself. That would mean that every I think that would mean that every being that individually exists does is somehow upheld by being itself, and that there's some sort of connection there going on. So I think that is really the easiest way that I could explain God as being itself. That's also the most you probably could guess that from a mile away if you know anything about classical theism. But I guess I would look at his other kind of suggestions there. He says the supreme being. I don't think that's really true, because supreme being implies that it's just one being among many, right? But it's supreme. It's higher amongst the many. And then to say the ground of all being, that's getting closer. But I think that there, at least in my own mind, when I read that, I think of the individual source of all individual being, and I think that that's also a problem. That's also not classical theism. What classical theism is being itself. It's not an individual thing at all. It just is, and that's really hard. Again, that's really, really difficult to explain further than that.
The only thing that I'm going to offer here is that I agree that I am very confused by what being itself like actually means. When I hear the classical theists make that move, I'm always like, I don't understand. I'm
Right.
sorry, I don't
And
understand.
I think it's something that approximates a limit in calculus. You get utterly, utterly close to it, and then you hit infinity, but you're never actually hitting infinity, right? I think it's something that very much approximates that, although it's not just a mathematical infinity where it goes in two directions like a line forever, but it's an absolute eternal infinity which goes in absolutely every direction and every dimension forever. I think that mathematical idea can kind of help, but even still, that's just an approximation. It's like a limit in calculus, if that offers any sort of conceptual aid
Cool,
to you.
cool. I do like my maths. I took up through Calc,
Me
Calc
too.
4. So.
Me too. Yep. Oh yeah.
The proverbial, always, forever last question. What's new with you? What's going on? Are you working on a script that you're excited about? And where can we find you?
Yeah, so you can find me at catholicisminthecar.com. Pretty much everything that I'm linked to is there. My YouTube channel, Catholicism in the Car, you can search it. Any podcast stuff I'm on. I'm on pretty much any podcast platform you can think of. I have done a few talks recently. I have a number of interviews coming up. I only do one interview a month, Kevin, and right now I'm booked out till December.
Oh, wow.
So I can't guarantee that we'll be able to do this again like super soon.
Next year, next April.
Yeah. So and the reason for that is because having a family and full-time job and everything, I can only do so much. This is really just a hobby for me. So,
Same.
Yeah. So to keep balance there, but that's kind of stuff that's coming up. And then I post episodes weekly on my channel on the podcast. So feel free to check them out if you like what I'm discussing. I think I do a very similar thing to what Kevin does. We just take it from two different angles, and I think that's a really beautiful, beautiful thing. So I hope to continue this striving after the truth with you, Kevin. I seriously, I mean that with all my heart. So
I do too. Parker, it was awesome having you on today. Thank you so much for coming on. Everybody go subscribe to Catholicism in the Car on YouTube. Go find him on all his other platforms. And with that, until next time, everybody.